All right, everybody. The Shock Pod is live.
It's alive! Enter the shock pod at your own risk.
Presented by HorrorShock Media. This is a Horrorpunk and Shock rock podcast, hosted by Reverend Chad Wells.
From the HorrorShock Records Creepy Crawlers band room lair, we are hosting the new Horrorpunk and Shock Rock podcast. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff from yesterday, today, and tomorrow's horror bands and fans. We're going to talk about show memories. We're going to talk about what bands we've been in, what bands are impressing us now, what got us into this, what we've got on our battle vests, and all of that kind of stuff. So episode 1, everybody, I'm going to go around and kind of introduce these gentlemen, and then we're going to kick off this conversation. We're going to go to the guy I've known the longest. That's my brother from another mother, Mr. Kyle 13. Say hello, Kyle.
Hey, what's up, everyone?
Kyle 13, I met when he was a young boy and I was an adult man, and it's not as seedy as it sounds. He was my brother's friend, and I scoped him and stole him from my brother's bands and put him in my bands for many years. He was in the Jackalopes with me. He was in the Loveless. He was in the Luxury Pushers. He was in what's that other band? The Big Bad. He's been in a bunch of bands, and you know him, you love him. It's Kyle 13, ladies and gentlemen.
Yay!
And then next up is Mr. J.G. Shepherd. Say hello there.
How's it going?
What should I call you? Should I call you JG or Jage or Jeej or Doug?
He just my high school nickname. So I've had that nickname for like 30 years. But God, I had a plethora of scene names.
What are we calling you in this one? What are we
Just
calling you?
That's what all of my friends know me as. And
all right. Well, he's been a fixture in the horror punk scene. He was there riding the entire second wave, sort of from the beginning to the end with all of us. He was in bands, but we know him as one of the giant fans and supporters in our scene, one of the people that makes it actually go. So he's going to represent our fan perspective today on this episode. And then last but certainly not least, a man I've known nearly as long, like barely squeaked in under Mr. Kyle 13 there. Dan Canzonieri from the legendary Electric Frankenstein, among other bands, which we'll talk about. Say hello, Dan.
Hello, Dan.
Dan's got the Ace Frehley vibes today.
Yeah.
Even as a bass player, he understands that Ace is more rock and roll than Gene, though Gene is the scary cool guy. Or scary uncool guy, depending on what your Kiss affiliation is. So, guys, we've got a lot to talk about. Everything from Dan is getting ready to sail to the lands of the Far East to bring rock and roll to Japan, which I know is an enormous deal for him. It's an enormous deal for his entire band, but I know it's way bigger deal for Dan than it is for anybody else in that band. Kyle 13 is former Jackalope horror punk fixture who has turned rock and roll dad and is now teaching at a school of rock, which is freaking rad.
So much fun, man. So much fun.
Yeah, so let's get the party started, guys. Let's go around, start Dan backwards and talk about what was the first thing that you remember where the peanut butter and the chocolate moment where you realized that horror and rock and roll went together really well.
I mean, I think my earliest probably goes back to like Kiss, with Gene and the blood and all that. And that's just prior to my like introduction to Misfits, thanks to my older brother. And then that's the real click.
Right.
It's like being 10 years old in 82 and being in my brother's record store and those guys walking in and going, whoa.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's Teenagers from Mars for real. Those guys had to be like from another planet when they walked in.
Oh yeah. Totally. It
Can we
was
all pretty much agree that it was the Misfits that was the thing? Does anybody else have another? I mean, same as Dan, Kiss. I know Kyle was a Kiss guy. There's a lot of stuff in pop culture that I think continually puts rock and roll and scary stuff together. But is the Misfits where it started for all of us?
I mean, I guess origin point for me, I was left alone with my dad's record collection a lot. There's a lot of obscure shit in there. And he had a record. It was super crazy looking. It was called Coven.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I put that on and it was like the Lord's Prayer backwards and super scary. And I was like, I was in the house alone, so I got freaked out. But yeah, that was probably origin point. And your Kiss and your Cooper, of course, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. Like my brother was real big on Alice Cooper. So like I remember seeing was it like the calendar or something that came with the Killer's record? And
Yeah,
it's
with
like
the hanging where he's hanging.
and
Yeah.
that was hanging on the wall in my brother's room, and I just remember being like completely intrigued and scared at the same time when I was younger.
And he's still doing it today, just as good. Top tier.
Absolutely.
What-
Yep. I try to catch him every time I can.
To parallel that though, like I did get Alice Cooper's Constrictor like super early on cassette tape, but to one of his best friends who I had an unhealthy obsession with was White Zombie, because I think I'm slightly younger than everyone here, just a little bit, like I'm early 40s, so but
that's where I'm at. I got you, baby.
yeah like
he's a little guy.
yeah, like serious, like 90, I think it was when Astro Creep 2000 came out, I saw the video on MTV for More Human Than Human and was like, yeah. But then I found the Misfits and that was the most unhealthy obsession. Actually, probably healthy obsession, because I would be a different person without the Misfits. But yeah, everything just kind of steamrolled right into the Misfits.
Yeah, I think and it's funny that they are the collection point for all of us really in the scene usually.
Yeah.
And of course there's contentions as to which Misfits and all of that, and that's age related too. But like when I was a young guy and I was looking for horror and punk stuff that went together, the stuff like Rocky Erickson, Rocky called himself horror punk. Like it existed in weird forms before the Misfits tribe sort of took the term over.
Screaming
There was
Jay
weird,
Loggins, too.
Yeah.
But there was weird like psychedelic connections to it that we always tried to keep in it in the Jackalopes. Like we have weird psychedelic breaks and stuff, but that really got filtered down to just like a whole different beast by the time we hit the second wave of horror punk, which is, the popularized, like if you go to Spotify right now, it's Blitzkid, Calabrese, the list goes on and on. But it's really interesting that that's the way that it goes, and I don't know if that's like, is that cultural, or we just like suburban white guys, and that's like why suburban white guys from New Jersey were so appealing to us. Like what's the weird, you know what I mean, like what made that the thing that we went like, oh yeah, I'm one of those guys. I see those guys and I know I'm one of those guys. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, but I do kind of see a little bit of that, like what you're saying, because like the dudes that lived like in New York City were not so hot on the Misfits as opposed to the dudes coming from the suburbs.
Yeah, 100%. And that was that was the thing with our band, the Jackalopes, that we were a suburban punk band. We weren't a real Dayton punk band, but of course we ended up drawing bigger crowds than everybody else, and they let us in their club. But it's a thing that I think that Kiss suffered from too. It's a kids band, not necessarily suburb city, but if you talk to guys from New York, even though they were all friends, there's the Dolls and there's Kiss. Well, Kiss is a joke and the Dolls are real. Well, they all kind of ran in the same circles and they were doing the same thing. So what makes one more real than the other? And it's a weird thing. And I think a lot of times the more gimmick we put in, the more we get pigeonholed into it's for kids, it's for suburban kids, it's for whatever. It's not the real stuff. Right. And that's a weird place to be.
I mean, not that it's not been said a million times before about the Misfits, but Glenn and Jerry, mostly Glenn, but it was the first band outside of Kiss to culminate with comic books, horror, collectability, obscurity, and mysteriousness. It slammed everything together in just the right, like, rock and roll stew. And they were the first ones to really hit that particular mark, at least that I can think of. Because everybody else had, at least at some point, major label backing behind them, or at least bigger label backing behind them at some point.
Right. Right. Well, that's the other thing too, Dan, you can probably talk to this. The Misfits were something that, when you got into punk after the existence of the Misfits in the early 80s, they were one of the bands that you would find out about. They were so ultra collectible but rare. It was just like toy collecting or comic book collecting. You had to kind of travel and know people and make weird deals to get their stuff. But then now we talk about them as though they were a Kiss or a Wasp or a whatever that was kind of a major label thing, but they were really a local band
Yeah,
that I mean they toured and everything, but they were very local and very a small niche thing that somehow exploded through fucking skateboards and Metallica into the
right.
Grateful Dead of punk rock, you know?
And that original version of the band, the majority of the time, they weren't drawing many people at their shows. You know, they're if they got 100 people, they were lucky. It wasn't until maybe 82, 83 that they started getting these bigger shows, mostly in like California and stuff, Detroit.
That was because of like Black Flag's respect and that, right?
Yeah, but they would go on tour and make no money, and tour like Black Flag and make no money like Black Flag too in the beginning, you know. But they, to their credit, they kept doing it and they kept going. Um, and I guess getting these other bands into them, Black Flag definitely helped them. I think them hooking up with the Necros definitely helped them and Tesco V in Detroit. So they had these things that kind of helped them spread out with these other bands, but they weren't really known for. Yeah, I didn't get to go see any of those early shows. I was too young, but I'd go, talk to my brother. He'd come home after, tell me, oh yeah, that was great, blah 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 blah. But it's like, you can name on one hand who was there. Like he knew everybody in the audience,
Right.
and half of them came in from New Jersey together, and then got beat up by the cops when they left to go home after the show and stuff.
That's so wild. That's insane. It's gotta be, it would be neat to be able to go and like juxtapose that against like the scene I
It
know. Do you know what I
seems
mean?
like a lot of the stuff was like super calculated,
Right.
like they did all these things on purpose.
Right.
And the more you peel the layers off, I don't know if it's good or bad for the mystique of it, but it's like you realize like a lot of things were just by accident or necessity or this or that. And while it worked out really cool for us because it became this collectible, mysterious thing, a lot of it was like, oh, that's why. Or it was like, oh, it's like
Yeah.
you don't even want to know because it ruins some things for you. But it's like they were kind of a bunch of idiots, and Glenn was pretty calculated with things, but you know they shot themselves in the foot a lot. They did a lot of things wrong, you know, but it's still great. I mean, the whole aesthetic, mostly of like things being like cut and pasted together, and on those singles and stuff, it's can't get any more. The stuff you make up in your head, when you're a kid and you see that stuff, is way better than when you actually hear about, oh, that's why we did this, or oh, that the printing got fucked up and that's why it looks like that. And
I
like,
almost
Right. No,
like
that's yeah.
I almost hated hearing the stories from like the guy who wrote the haunted house
Mhm.
like insert. Like
Yeah, Dave
like,
Street, I think, right?
yeah, I finally heard the story of that and I was like, damn it, I didn't want to know that.
What was the story? I don't know that one. That one passed over my head. What's that one?
uh what was that in Three Hits from Hell?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That,
so
uh,
was it? Or was that in
no, it's in the horror business.
Horror Business? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like they put the because the recording had some funky background stuff in it, and it was just like standard issue Misfits recording, so it was crap, but like endearingly crap, this stuff we've come to love.
Yeah.
What do you remember the guy's name, Dan?
Yeah, Dave Street. It doesn't say it on there,
Yeah,
but that he was like kind of semi-managing them.
yeah.
So
So Dave Street writes this like blurb about how they recorded in a haunted house and it picked up like ghost sounds on the recording.
yeah.
And it's just one of those like little things where they made up some shit
Oh
like
yeah, I remember
behind the
seeing
scenes.
that, being like 10 years old and seeing that, like talk to my brother, like it really was in a haunted house, and he's like, oh yeah, totally, you know.
I could see
Well, then you
Sal
go
backing
back and
that.
see the photos with like Vampira and stuff like that and Glenn, and you're like, oh my God.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, you know. And then to find out, yeah, being a dude, uh, they could have hooked up with Vampira, and one of them didn't do it. It's like that's a lost opportunity. I'm sorry, you know.
Yes, sir.
Oh
I
my
bother,
God.
I bust my brother's chops all the time because he turned down Tourist Satana at a horror convention, and I was like, I don't care how old she was. It's Tourist Satana. For the story alone, you should have done it.
Right?
Yeah, no, Sal could have been like faster pussycat, killed it.
Yep. Right? She introduced us at that convention because we were playing the party on Saturday night, and Scotty was singing at the time. She picked him up off the ground still as an old lady. Like she
Wow.
was in great shape. So
That's wild.
scared the shit out of Scott.
That's hilarious.
Maybe
And
that's
she
why
would say
Sal
stuff
took
like, I'll tear you in half if we
it down. It's
so
probably
they
when
should have
Sal
hooked
turned
up
it
with
down, he was gonna
Vampire
be
though.
ripped in half.
So
So
that's an interesting thing too, is the way in which like the nichification of like our music allows us to get entry into meeting the people that we grew up worshiping,
yeah,
Dan,
right.
you've got a myriad of stories of people that you've gotten to kind of
Yeah.
meet or befriend because you have a band that isn't doing anything massively different or groundbreaking than any other rock and roll band, but you're doing it consistently and with the same style and aesthetic the entire time. And it's got the same sort of loud presentation in the promotional materials as it does in the music. And it's like it just clicks. So you guys are, if the Misfits are the Stones or the Grateful Dead of horror punk, you guys are in some kind of level of similar things. Like if there's a Spencer's Gifts in Hell, you guys definitely have lighters and t-shirts and ink pens and whatever. So
But
how
somehow
how
Sherry
everybody,
figured out
like
how to
who
get
have you met
10%
that
of
you
it.
never thought you would meet? Mine was Dr. Demento. Like there's been a million. Dan
Right.
even being one of them. I was like, Electric Frankenstein wants to meet us. Let's go, fucking go. But like Dr. Demento was the weird one for me. What do you guys have one that's bizarre that you'd never thought that like, holy crap, I never thought playing in a garage band would take me here or being a fan of
Yeah,
something?
I've definitely this one's not even horror punk related. So when I was in my early 20s, I was in a psychedelic punk band called the Guild Navigators. And the space rock is like it's a very similar, very niche kind of scene like horror punk.
Mhm.
We got to play with Hawkwind in
Oh wow.
Allentown, Pennsylvania, and that whole show was the most bizarre shit I've ever had. Like, so my old drummer Stinky, who passed away a couple of years ago, he and I get out of like our van and we start walking up to the venue, and the show was being put on by our old keyboardist Doug and one other guy, and the other guy I can't remember his name for the life of me. It was 20 something years ago, but he walks out and he just goes, points directly at me and Stinky, goes, if Hawkwind tries to leave with my fucking money, you two are gonna kick their asses.
Oh man.
I'm just like,
well, thanks for putting me in charge of that one.
yeah, I'm like, okay, so and then we got screwed on that whole show because we drove 15 hours to play with them and ended up playing after them, right? And then, like, Doug's band Scattered Planets cleared the entire venue out of like 400 people. So we played to the lighting guy and like 3 people, and it was one of the best sets we ever played. It was,
Of course.
I have it on
it was.
VHS.
The best set is always when there are no cameras and no crowd.
Yep.
You know, I had a similar situation where supposed to play a show at CBGB's, and fucking Von Elmo went on before us, and he cleared out the whole place to the point where I left 3/4 of the way through Von Elmo's set going, nah, I'm out. I'm not even going to bother playing. I'm just going home.
Wow.
Von
What about you,
Elmo.
Kyle? Is there anything you can think of?
I mean, being on some of the bills with some of these dudes just blew my mind. I mean, there was, the Marky Ramone shows.
We backed him up for one of those.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Even, the Bobby Steele thing was cool because that guy's got such an aura around him. Jackalopes opened for Mushroom Head, which was totally obscure, but it worked. So just
that was a great show. That was 100% a great show.
It worked. Just being on some of those bills, I mean, I'm sure Electric Frankenstein the same way. It's like, oh, we got this show with these guys. That's great. Playing with your heroes.
Craziest story about the Damned.
Ooh. Do tell.
If you want to hear it.
Let's hear it. And then
I don't want to cut you off, though. I don't want to cut you off, though.
No. Let's hear the Damned story, and then we're going to segue into the adolescence in Japan story.
So, we were touring in the UK. It was probably like 98, 99, something like that. And we were playing in Nottingham, right? This little club called the Old Angel. And I was like, we get into town. I'm like, fuck, the Damned's playing at, Rock City. And we're like, whatever, so we go to the club. It's early. This gnarly skinhead dude comes in. He's like, oi, you guys are coming with me. We're like, okay, where are we going? We're going to see the Damned. Come on. So I was like, fuck, all right. I'll go with this strange dude I've never met in a taxi to go see the Damned. So we get to the venue and he's like, these guys are on the guest list. Still, it's over my head. I'm like, thank you, skinhead man. Like, I'm not putting anything together yet, We watched the Damned. Patricia Marson's playing in the band still. It's a great show. And then we have to run over to the club to finally, get set up for our show. And of course, it was like, hurry up and wait. Like, we got there. We thought we were running late. The show is like, we still had an hour. But, we get on stage and I can see in the back of the room, I'm like, is that Captain Sensible? Don't tell me Dave Vanian is here. Like, so I'm like, okay. And then after we played our set, they came over and they're like, hey, we're having an after party at Rock City. Come back to the club. And, they didn't go to their own after party. It came to our show to get us, and after, we get over there, they're like, yeah, man, we sent that guy to come and get you. We're big fans. Our drummer Pinch, like, he was constantly listening to you guys in the tour van, and that's what got us, into you guys. And I was just like, my mind was completely blown from that. And I was like, I never in a million years would have thought like the Damned is gonna come seek us out,
That's so wild.
And it turned out like Pinch got into us because we did a Naked Ray Gun cover, and he's a big Naked Ray Gun fan, and he heard that and then went from there. So it's such a weird way to get into, this Chicago punk band that like I didn't even think people in the UK knew about. You know what I mean?
Huh.
So
100%. Yeah, that's how those things happen though. It's the bizarre, even for so much of the world to know again about the Misfits. The somebody liked them and skated to them and handed them to Cliff Burton, and Cliff liked them, and you know what I mean? It creates
yeah,
these weird little moments that you attach to, and then you carry it on, and it goes places that you're not in charge of. And sometimes
we
it ends
we
up
toured
being.
with the Damned twice from that meeting.
You also
And
got the Damned to
oh
relearn one
my,
of their old songs to sing it, especially for your
well,
daughter for her
well,
birthday.
yeah, it was actually a new song though.
Oh, a new song.
So
Okay.
yeah, so they had this song "Little Miss Disaster." They had put it out as a single. It was they threw it on whatever album had just come out around that time, and my daughter was probably like 11, going on 12, and constantly making me put that song on in the car. Oh, I want to hear "Little Miss Disaster." She thought of herself as that. It had Emily the Strange on the cover of the single too, um, which Dave named his daughter after her. Um, so I was telling them, oh, my daughter's going to be at the last show on the tour when we hit New Jersey, and it's her birthday, and she's hoping that you guys are going to play Little Miss Disaster. And they were like, we've never ever played that song live. We recorded it in the studio and just left it there. So every day at sound check, they practiced the song and got it down. And then when we got to the Stone Pony on that Friday, they called her up on the stage, sang "Happy Birthday," played the song for her, and she danced with Dave Vanian the whole time. And could people were like telling her like, "You're the luckiest kid in the world." There's all these goth girls like dying over it.
That's
And
amazing.
it's so amazing that they would do that, because you always hear stories about them being like pranksters and assholes and this and that, fucking with people all the time, the Damned. So like for them to do something really kind of sweet like that, it was really nice of them. They didn't have to do that.
Yeah, no, but
and
you
and Vanian doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. You know what I mean? They'll book a
that's been
show,
made
and if he
obvious.
told them, I don't want to play that show, he just doesn't show up. you know
Wow.
Most singers would be gone. They can't do that with him. So
I
they have
I
shows
always
where it's
try to
like,
be that singer that can't be gone as well,
yes.
as much as
But
possible. You can
they'll
be
play the
gone. I
show,
will
and
not be gone.
yeah,
But that's also why the Damned have had what, like 45 members of their band through the year.
yeah,
Well,
we're close second.
yeah, I was gonna say Electric Frankenstein's right in there too.
We learned from them.
So speaking of all of that stuff, you are getting ready to head to Japan. When's that happening?
uh October, I think the first show is October 10th.
Awesome. And that's for a big, like, it's the adolescence, but it's leading up to a big Halloween show, or is it all like a
Yeah,
Halloween?
so it's a 10-day tour with the adolescents, and starting off in Tokyo, we do this loop around Japan, come back, and end up in Tokyo again for the big Halloween ball they have over there. And that is this insane show they do. It's usually on Saturday and Sunday. And they bring in every freaking Japanese garagey, crampsy, horror, whatever band possible. Like all of the Japanese bands all play at this thing, and
That's
then they'll
awesome.
bring in bands from other countries. I think this year we headlined it in 2017. The Fuzz Tones are headlining this year, so then you play Saturday and Sunday. But this is just like our Saturday tour date. They were nice enough to be like, yeah, you and the adolescents can hop on, you know.
That's
So
amazing. That's
But that
awesome. So
show,
are you
I
taking
can't.
extra empty luggage just to bring
I
back
am.
toys and stuff?
I am. I'm going 2 days early before the rest of the band comes, and I'm leaving a day later too. So I make sure I have adequate time to go shopping and fill those suitcases up with lots of toys. And I have some people in different cities that are going to bring me around to different places.
Yeah,
And
man. Well,
I
you got to come on
the
here after you get back and do a haul, and
yeah,
we'll have a toy collector kind of episode. We'll try to get Kirk Hammett.
I can make some calls.
I mean, that's
I
it.
have
The six
I have
degrees of
direct
that's one of the
yeah.
things Kyle can attest to. I've always preached the 6 degrees of separation or the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We do know somebody somehow, and I know exactly how you know Metallica, guys. Through a myriad of ways, from James being a fan of your band to Dirty Donnie doing artwork
Right.
for both
I
bands.
the nice thing is like I, I've had times where it's like I text something to Donnie like, oh, I found this thing and I think it's really rare. I wonder if Kirk knows anything about it. And he's like, oh, here, send me a picture. I'll text it to him. It's like 2 seconds later, a minute later, it's like, oh, Kirk said it's this and it's worth this much and blah 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 blah.
See,
So
that's
it's kind of cool to be able to do that sometimes for sure. And we've
all.
had them show up in San Francisco at shows. That's how Dirty Donnie got hooked up with them, was that they were fans of ours and they saw his art. And then he moved to San Francisco and they were like, oh yeah, you're coming in
Well,
doing stuff for
the
us.
coincidences of things, like you guys end up being one of the super hot bands in the hot rod gearhead rockabilly kind of adjacent world at the
Yeah,
exact time where it becomes cool for aging metal guys to be into all of that stuff. So when
right.
Hetfield switches from Hesher Skater into Car Dad, there you
Yep.
guys are in every freaking magazine on the soundtrack for every video that
Yeah.
had to do with the subject matter, and not so you could be in front of James Hetfield, but just because you have a compulsion to make rock and roll and not just sit on it at home.
Yeah.
Let me license this, send it out, do whatever I can do to share it. That's one of the things that I think the big so many people try and sit on it and like, I'm only going to release this many songs. I'm going to do an album a year. I got to hold this back from this comp. I can't loan this out to this comp. Electric Frankenstein's always been an open door to like, you're doing a comp, you can put any of our songs you want on it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
We very, very seldomly ever said no to something.
yeah, yeah. And
Somebody
that's
wants
why
to
you get
license
so
something.
many yeses now. That's like karma and law of attraction stuff,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I
Oprah
mean, you never
Winfrey.
know who ends up seeing it, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I got into you because I saw some video of like snowboarders wiping out, and your band was like on the soundtrack of all these guys wiping out, Learn to Burn or something. And then I went from there, or it's like I played Tony Hawk's Underground and I heard that Annie's Grave in there, and I had to find more of your stuff. So, it pays to not,
I,
not say
I
no.
think that's actually the scenario of how I found out about EF back in the day. So like the I was an obsessive Misfits fan, clearly. And I was like a moderator on 138.com back in the
Mhm.
day.
I
And
remember it.
yeah, and do you remember the
Mhm.
Book of Pooh?
Hmm?
Do you remember the Book of Pooh? James Only and me and Stitches from the Reanimated, like he did artwork for it. James used to release these fake interviews on the Misfits Bible, like
Okay.
way
Right.
back.
Yeah.
So, but like we had a website and whatever. So the Misfits were like huge into it. I met so many people through through the forums back in the day,
Yeah.
and one of those people was Chris Redman from the band Valdez out of England. And I've been
Mhm.
friends with Chris for 25 years. And EF did a split 7-inch with Valdez forever long ago. And I think that was how I found out about EF, because he goes, check this out. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. So that was, I think, but I got that, and then I got How to Make a Monster right after that, and I was off to the races.
Awesome. The Misfits Bible, like I miss those days, and they would do things like, like the first Misfits like post Glenn show was at a surprise gig at Coney Island High in New York City. They were supposed to do that after our set. They ended up, Doyle was like kind of having a panic attack. He hadn't played in, since the last Misfit show in front of people. And now word of mouth kind of got around because, they show up and they're not like in their, New York Giants gym clothes. They're full on gear. So then, people are making phone calls and people are talking, and that place is so packed, and we're plugging into the amps, and Doyle's like, if I don't play right now, I'm leaving. Like I could see the fear in his eyes at that moment, which I'd never seen before, And so Jerry was like, push us out of the way, kind of, and they just started playing, and then we had to go on after them. But the nice thing in the Misfits Bible was first Misfits show, blah, 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 opening for Electric Frankenstein at Coney Island High. I'm like, technically, that's what happened.
That's perfect.
Or
In the
Sardonica had to go
Jackalopes
on
days,
after that.
in the Jackalopes days, the Misfits Bible was absolutely our entry into so many things because of Kyle and Gigi playing a couple of shows with Bobby and the Undead, and those weird little connections we got listed in there. So it was like a as seen on TV for horror relative bands at the time. It was like here's the computer, look, I'm in the Misfits Bible.
Well, that was, I mean, from the fan perspective, that was how I started really finding out about all those bands. And I just watched Joel's his most recent one with Sal, his
Yeah.
like that thing. They were talking about mp3.com. And I was thinking about it, I needed to bring this up because I like anyone who's watching this who's young and didn't experience mp3.com, you have to realize how insanely crucial that website was in like 2000 to 2003 or 4, because I found Blitzkid, the Jackalopes, Mr. Underhill, which became Nim Vend, Mr. Monster. I'm trying to think who else was on there that I found. A lot of those MP3s I found on there.
Cancer Slug
Yeah.
was early
We were,
adopters for sure.
Well, like
it was
those led
really
me
big
over to
for
the
us
Antidote
too.
Records. I was gonna say that led me over to the Antidote Records website, and I ended up like actually having music on that label, but it was all because mp3.com led me there, and then all those bands just started popping up. Shadow Reichenstein.
Oh, I love Shadow
Yeah.
Reichenstein. I
I
miss
want that
Shadow.
third album so bad.
Yeah, all the names you're so, mp3.com was crucial for me in my musical evolution at that time, alongside MySpace. Those two things as a
Yeah.
1-2 punch really were the launching pad for so many bands, and we, the Jackalopes at the time, really benefited from it because we had um old guys like me who kind of knew how to present it and put it up in those places and do the artwork and stuff. And then we had young guys like Kyle 13 who were like the MySpace sweetie boys out there, like posting 1,000 pictures a day in his makeup and whatever. And so it kind of helped us like build a fan base really fast. But also like we start like the comps. Of course, there's great compilation records throughout history. Like a lot of my favorite records are compilation records, from K-Tel stuff to whatever. But like in the punk scene, comps are kind of an integral thing to introducing a bunch of bands all at once or a label's sound all at once. And so, in the Jackalopes days, I started doing the Hell Night Horrorama series. I had Electric Frankenstein, I had Cancer Slug. I think I put out Cancer Slug's first comp track, like the first time they were on a comp. I put out like a couple of those things, and they had like a ton of bands on them, and some of them sounded like absolute crap because MP3s deteriorated so poorly and whatever. But we were able to reach audiences immediately, whereas in my previous band, COH, spent 10 years of just using Book Your Own Fucking Life and no internet to try to like mail cassettes to people in Iowa and wherever to try to get one show a year, like out of state. And, it was like, yeah, the mp3.com thing was enormous. I watched that Joel interview with Sal as well. And that was one of the things that I was like, I almost completely forgot about that. I remember it as I just put out all these CDs, but it was because of this site where we could upload all the music, you could stream it in real time, listen to it, or you could buy a physical CD right now. And we would put things out and change the covers. We did the first live thing we did was a real live fuck machine, and we re-released that several times with different covers and slightly different names, just because people would buy it. Oh, now there's a version that has bigger boobs on the cover. I'm gonna buy that. Oh, there's a skull on this one. I'm gonna buy it. And so you could change up your merch constantly and buy 5 copies for your merch table at a time instead of 500, which had previously been the thing. It
Well,
was
then
huge.
when you finally got to shows and bands would swap CDs and everybody be selling everything at everybody's merch table.
Yeah, that's that another. I
Yeah.
keep saying back in the Jackalopes days. I don't want to talk too much about old times, but I obviously am. But giving Blitzkid like 50 of our records to take to Germany the first time they went, and they sold those there. Suddenly, we're an international band. You
My,
know
my,
what I
my,
mean? Like
my first
we
ad-
didn't go. I didn't. I never made it across the pond. Like I never went, but all my friends' bands did, and I sent everyone I could with copies of our stuff. So.
my first horror punk show was that 1470 West Halloween show in '03
Oh yeah,
Ah,
the
yeah.
Blitz
with
Kid.
Temple of Misery and Morphic Resonance.
I have
I have the poster right behind me.
I do too, as a matter of fact. There were 3 shows in a row that we did, and we're forgetting one of the bands, and I can't remember who it was. Oh, Terrorific, yeah.
Justin and Hallow didn't actually play that show, if I remember right.
Oh, they played one of them. Some maybe they
That-
didn't. I don't remember.
No,
It's all a blur.
I remember because they changed their name to Dead End Drive-In right after that.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that show I bought from Steve Goolsby. I bought the Jackalopes, Jacksploitation, Mr. Monsters, Over Your Dead Body, and his like the Blitz Kid, like when he was still printing CDs at home, Revisited and
Yeah.
Let Flowers Die. Like
Yep.
that was my first show. That's like my haul from that show.
That show was awesome. That's a great first impression of all of those bands, because we definitely played way smaller shows with all of those bands.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We had that was the other thing we had, is we had a nice local scene that like we weren't necessarily a part of like the rock scene here. We were kind of outsiders. But like we were beloved by the gay bar scene and the whatever. And so 1470s was a legendary gay bar in Dayton that existed for many, many, many years. And we all grew up as punk rock kids going there after hours, after Rocky Horror. Thursday nights, late night, they'd play alternative music after hours. And it was all ages after 1 a.m. in the early days because they didn't serve alcohol. So I was 15 in that place, like dancing with drag queens to the Violent Femmes and stuff in the 80s. And then it moved downtown, and Kyle 13 became a regular, worked there as well as played there. And so we had just the use of the space, and like it was a scene where like they understood it wasn't a horror punk scene, it was a gay drag scene. But just like Max's Kansas City and New York and all of that, they understood promoting something and setting up an aesthetic and having a vibe and presenting it. It's not CBGBs with dog shit on the floor. It's something that's we can elevate this night because we respect art or whatever. Like 1470s let us do that. And that Blitz Kid show, I remember it being hilarious because they were scared out of their mind. They had hardly left their hometown ever before. And they were like, what is wrong? They were like Christian boys from the country, and they came to Dayton, Ohio, and it was like there were snake handling drag queens, and like the Jackalopes were almost our own kind of weird cult of perversity.
Didn't you have
And
somebody dressed up as a jackalope that night?
yeah,
Yeah.
I kicked him off the stage onto his head. That was our friend Zach Preston. Zach always would film for us, and he was one of those guys that would talk about the band as we and include himself in the band. And there's a part of me that likes that, but there's a non-sports part of me that doesn't like that. Like when you talk about whatever your sports team is, around here it's the Bengals or the Browns, but you say we're going to beat so and so, like no you're not. You're going to watch somebody do it. So I would always get offended by Zach's ownership of my band, which is a terrible thing to have for a fan or a friend, but I had that brewing. And he decided he was going to make this Jackalopes costume himself. I kept telling him, don't do it. It's stupid. I don't want you to do it. So he made this thing and it was awesome. It was a big Easter bunny costume with antlers and it had rippling muscles. It had a flap in the front where a big fake dong would fall out from time to time and it would pump. I can't remember what he had in there, like Bailey's Irish cream or something.
He could drink a beer and it would funnel through.
That's it. Yeah. It would come out the wiener and people could drink it. So he got on stage and was dancing around and he got in front of me. And I just put my foot he bent over into the crowd and I put my foot right on his ass and just shoved him and he landed on his head. He was upset with me for quite a long time over that. And we never used the Jackalopes costume again. And he actually still once a year writes to me and says, "Hey man, do you want this costume yet?" I've been keeping it all these years for you. And I tell him that until the Punk Rock Museum calls asking for our stuff, I do not want that costume. I know how it's got to smell. That was a wild night, though. A Blitz Kid brought the game with the merch table. Like you said, they had all that stuff. They had little glow pots with fake fire in them and stuff. Like, it was definitely, that was, talking about first wave, second wave horror punk, that was where we saw the real dawning of that second wave of like, oh, these bands are really all serious. We're all actually doing this. We're going places. Because the Jackalopes were doing it, but we were riding like a pop punk wave that Gigi had been a part of in the Migraines. Like we were playing with the Ataris and we were playing with Fat Records bands and all of that kind of stuff all the time, and Green Day and No Effects adjacent bands and stuff, and we were the weird odd band out. But then when we found through mp3.com and MySpace, we found that there was one of us in every state. Essentially, there's one group of guys that thinks the Misfits are keen, and we all have engineer boots and vests, and we can swap eyeliner.
Well, no.
Yeah, that was one of the cool things, to fly the Jackalope flag even farther is, you had the goth kids that were into it. You had the greaser rockabilly kids that are into it. I'm sure you see this with Electric Frankenstein too. There's just, it spreads those genres out. So everybody's kind of into it. It's not just the punk rockers of Battle Vest, although we are all those punk rock kids with Battle Vest.
Yeah.
It's everybody's into it, man.
Yeah.
And Ohio was such a weird hub too, because not only did we have like one per state, we had one per city. Like you had the Manimals and Horror 59 up in Cleveland. Eventually you had Mumula out of Columbus, and then there was, the Vladimirs out of Cincinnati.
The Vlads, they're one of my favorite bands.
And the Jacks out of Dayton.
Epidemic, all those guys.
Reanimated.
I was at the first 3 Epidemic shows. I remember walking up to Nate after the very first show, and I'm like, "You're not allowed to play with the altar anymore. You're 15 and you sound like you're 35 and been singing for 40 years."
Nate ended up in Blitz Kid too, right?
Yeah, he did.
Yes.
Yep.
Everybody crosses over. It's so here's another funny thing, and Dan, you can chime in with your variant, because Electric Frankenstein, like we're talking about horror punk really specifically, and Electric Frankenstein definitely always rode in that car with us, but you guys are your own gang. Like there's a gang that's horror punk gang, and then there's this high energy rock and roll street punk Electric Frankenstein gang, and we swap in and out. But like you guys have other bands that are so for us, obviously in our time, it's Blitz Kid that we all go like, we love them. They worked hard. When we stopped, they kept going. When we couldn't afford to, they traveled, and we know why they got so big. However, the conversations in our scene are always like, well, it should have been the Independents, and it should have been the Jackalopes, and it
Yeah.
should have been the Vladimirs, and it should have been the whoever
Yeah.
who is it in the Electric Frankenstein? It's probably you guys. You guys are probably the band that everybody's going. It should have been.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of that, and I don't know. It's like, so I can take it back to so many different times where we played with bands that like we were always good with, like, if we liked a band, we tried to bring them up, you know what I mean? But like we would bring bands up and then they'd go past us and not even offer to like have us open up for them or do a tour together. It'd be like, oh, we don't know you anymore. And that would happen like a lot with stuff. Cause like, there's a like short little documentary on the Hives song, Hate to Say I Told You So.
Mm-hmm.
And, they basically say in that, like, the whole idea for that song was we went to see Electric Frankenstein and, they played a song and like the riff, they played the riff for like 5 minutes and, people went bananas over it. And usually, the way you'd play a riff for like 30 seconds and then you'd play another riff and you just play another riff. Like they did this other thing where they, it comes from the Stooges and stuff. And they'd never seen that before. And they said that's what they based that song on. That's why that song just has the one riff for the whole song. And it's like they never offered to do it. At least they mentioned in the documentary that's where it came from. But they say it in a way of like there was this band.
Yeah, it is like, far more.
We didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, no, it is far more than most bands will do, but it's also sort of reductive in a way too, where it puts you as this thing that a bump in the past or something like that.
That first show we did in Sweden, we had a couple of singles out. I don't think we even had our first album out yet, but it did well over there in Scandinavia, and all these bands formed out of, like, you hear about the show in the Sex Pistols playing in Manchester, and everybody in the audience was all people that started, Joy Division, whatchamacallit,
Or like the Clash and
like
whatever.
All these bands started from seeing that one Sex Pistol show. That was the whole audience, right?
There were 30 people there, and every single one started a band that became like an enormous band. Yeah,
right.
I've heard that.
So it's like, that first time we played there, then you had the helicopters, like Nicky was writing us fan letters when he was playing drums for Entombed.
That's what I was going to say. You guys were absolutely part of the thing that happened in the Sweden rock scene, where it went from all of these metal guys overnight. You had Turbo Negro and Helicopters,
right.
and everybody's doing Johnny Thunders, Dead Boys, rock and roll now. And
so we played that first show, and then it like blew up from there, and all these bands like the next time we went back, we played with Glucifer, the Helicopters, Turbo Negro, like all of those, but they were all people that were at that first show, or they'd been writing us some letters because that's what you did back then, and they just had our first couple of singles and they were like, whoa, what's this, and they were mostly like metal dudes.
Yeah.
And we were into that stuff. So like, we were like, holy shit, we got a letter from the dude from Entombed, and he's like, meanwhile, we're changing his whole perspective. He's made a whole new career for himself after this.
Yeah.
They became the biggest band, and they won a Grammy. Like they have a Helicopters mobile that the record label bought them. You know what I mean?
Did you guys play with the New Bomb Turks much? Because like I kind of came out of that Columbus scene and that whole Crypt Records thing.
We played with them a bit. I don't know. I could.
I know. I
Fuck
know.
it. I don't care.
There was
I don't give a
You're
shit.
getting-
I have no like could care less. I'm not a big fan of what's his name? Was it Eric the singer?
Yeah. So the way you're talking about the Swedish scene and all that,
Yeah.
it just automatically made me think of Eric Davidson
Yeah.
literally saying the exact same thing, except instead of you guys being there, it was he was talking about like all the Hives guys going to New Bomb Turk
Bomb Turk.
shows, and like he apes that whole scenario
Yeah.
as well.
And then
New
he
Bomb
did that
Turks were
book.
definitely
He
following
did
the
that book and like doesn't mention us at all.
No,
Yeah.
he
He
doesn't.
mentioned every other band but us. But I think he knows that I'm not a big fan of his either. You know?
Eric wrote an article. He wrote actually my first tattoo magazine article that when I was first in the 90s or whatever featured in a tattoo magazine, he wrote it. And it was like it was one of those things where I was really stoked on getting this publication. It's 10 pages, you know what I mean? It's amazing. But he had to Eric the whole damn thing up into like all of this like just he was smarter than everything in the article kind of shit. And it was like, this is a bummer, man. Like this guy's got an attitude. So we got back at him though. The Jackalopes were playing a show at Bernie's Bagels and Distillery.
Bernie.
Legendary. We played there with Electric Frankenstein, I think
Yep.
once or twice.
Yeah.
We played there with everybody. We played there with Marky Ramone, the Undead, you name it, the Ataris, the Donnas, like on and on. And it was our little CBGBs in Columbus, you know what I mean? And we were playing a show there, and we were not the headliner. We were like second to last, but whoever the headliner was, we didn't care much about anyway. And so Ron or Gigi, I don't remember who, got a call from I don't remember the bar, bigger bar up the street, this Hi-Fi or Stashes or something. It was a bigger place.
It's
And
probably
they were like, what was it?
said it was
High
probably
five.
was
Yeah,
it
High-Five. And so they called us and they're like, the New Bomb Turks are headlining this enormous show. The house is packed. They're supposed to go on stage in like 20 minutes. They're not coming. Will you guys come and jump on stage and play in their spot? So we did, but we rushed in so fast, we didn't even have time to say hi, we're the Jackalopes. We just got on stage and launched into our no talk in between, just kick them in the teeth set. And I mean, it was one of the best shows we ever played. The pit was insane. People were it was one of those rock and roll shows. People just rolling all over each other, drunken revelry, fantastic set. And then I came off stage, I bust out the back door, and one of our band members, who I won't name a name right now because I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not, but one of our band members that's not in this chat with us was in the back alley with his pants around his ankles, getting a spanking from a rock and roll girl who was at the show. And he left it that she thought that she spanked one of the guys from the New Bomb Turks. But it was really our band member. Don't insert name here.
Okay.
Yeah. Eric did a few things like that, like you were saying about that article. He did a few things like that with us, and that's what led. I didn't automatically not like the guy. He just did enough things where I was like, you know what, fuck this dude. Like,
yeah,
that's General Columbus.
he put out comps with us on there. And one of the comp is a nice thing, but it just ended up being a shitty product. I'll just put that. But they booked a show in New York City at this club SOBs, which we never ever play. And somehow our name was on the bill. We were not booked for that show, and it was like somebody just put that on there because that show was going to be in New York and trying to get people to show up. So we showed up and we're like, we're playing in that spot, and or we're gonna have some problems, with the club, the promoter, and everything. So you guys decide what you're gonna do, but you're gonna pay our guarantee whether we play or not.
wow.
Money.
That's a wild. I definitely saw some of that in the pre-internet days. I saw some of that like show stacking where bands that were not playing were absolutely put on bills to make it look bigger for sure.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
just
I
wild.
used to do some shit like not related to I would make fake flyers
Uh-huh.
because I was a bit of a prankster when I was younger.
We had
And
a we had a
so,
local music radio show, and we would call in with fake band names and announce shows that were coming up with like really vulgar band names.
well, I would make flyers for like things that like I put bands that don't really go together and make these lineups of like people would go, holy shit, and like
Right.
put a club that like doesn't exist or an address that doesn't exist, and people be like, oh, I saw flyers and like fucking salmon and fucking I got to think of like something like completely different. You know, I put like ACDC,
And
you
Human
know,
League.
and you know, yeah, just weird combinations things, and then flyer them all around the city, and people would be like, I'd be just laughing hearing about people like seeing them look at that and go, this can't be real. Where is this place? Blah blah blah, blah. And you know, it was fun, but it was like, you know, it wasn't a real show where I'm trying to stack something. It was like trying to do a prank on people that would, you know, freak people out.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, guys, we're getting to the point where we've officially gone over an hour. I'm going to cap it at an hour and a half because I got another one coming up. I obviously want to do this again with all of you as soon as possible, and we'll come up with some good topics to do it, and we'll mix you guys up with some other people. But I'd love to have you guys all back for the Shock Pod if you're into it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
So
Sure.
I'm gonna just to be silly and to give us something to go out on here. We're gonna do a rapid fire question round, okay? And these are questions that were not submitted by a listening audience because we don't have one yet. So if you out there are listening and you are an audience and would like to send us some questions for future episodes for bands, please send them to whatever email is attached to this by the time this comes out. But in the meantime, our good friend Chat GPT has written these rapid fire horror punk band and fan questions for us to answer. So let's see if Chat GPT can hold its salt here in the realm of interviewing. All right. So first question number one for musicians, and you're all musicians, so let's do that. If you could resurrect one horror movie villain to join your band, who would it be? Dan.
Oof. I mean, like an actor or a character? Like,
A
sorry.
character.
Oh, well, I mean, Frankenstein.
Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it?
The Glenn Strange version of Frankenstein, too.
Okay.
Ooh, that's
Oh,
good.
that's very good.
Yeah.
JG.
This is an easy one. The Tall Man from Phantasm.
Oh, not, what instrument would the tall man play? Is he a singer? He's a bass player. He kind of looks like a bass player.
Oh, he's a keyboardist, I think.
Keyboardist. That's really
Like
good.
some organ, something
Oh,
real
yeah.
creepy like that. Yeah.
So Kyle, you can any band you've been in, they're all similar enough. I think you could pick somebody, but let's, for the sake of it, since we're here together, say the Jackalopes.
Let's do Pinhead on bass.
Ooh, that's a
I
good
figured
one.
that'd be really good.
I think that's a good one. We did have a regular rotating bass position. So Pinhead, your chance is coming. Although he'll have to get an initial name because we had a GG, a JJ, and a PJ. PJ never made it to the stage, but if there's ever a thing, we'll see. Okay, so next, what's the next question? Pre-show, what's your go-to track for getting pumped up before a show? Kyle.
It was used to be Jack Daniels, and I would smell my keys a whole lot. Since I don't do that anymore. But I also played a lot of pranks on other bands pre-show. That kind of got me off a little bit. But now it's coffee.
Oh yeah. What about a song?
We'll
What's a
go with that
go-to? What song would you listen to warm up?
Ooh. It would be the Misfits, Motorhead, something super high energy, man.
That makes sense. JG?
Yeah.
This is gonna sound weird, but I'm such a fan of like bass heavy funk stuff. Like I would put on George Clinton's Computer Games,
Mm.
or yeah, it'd probably be Computer Games. That like is one of my like favorite like get me in the right headspace albums, or Parliament Funkadelics uh, Super Funka, the one that has Aqua Boogie on it.
Gotcha. Very good
You
choices.
say getting
Excellent.
funky.
Outside the box, excellent choices. Mr. Dan.
We would blast AC/DC. It's a long way to the top if you
Yeah.
want to rock and roll. That
Good one.
that would be the go-to every time and get everybody pumped up.
That's fantastic. Pre Creepy Crawlers show with you guys at Horror Hound, we did not pick the soundtrack, but for some reason, right before we played, the guy hit us with a bunch of 80s metal. Panama by Van Halen is a hell of a pump. All of us were backstage, like doing wall push-ups and squats and stuff to Panama. He played a Motley Crue song. I can't remember which one. Also excellent. I think for the Creepy Crawlers, 80s metal would be a super rev up, and I kind of always got revved up to that stuff. In the Jackalopes, I don't remember what it would have been, but when I was in COH, it was the first Clutch album, Transnational Speedway Leagues, or whatever the hell it was called. It had come on, motherfucker, let's throw down. I would just want to beat everybody up after I listened to that. Okay. If you had to get a tattoo of one horror punk lyric, what would it be? JG.
Oh God. Ooh, that's a broad question.
Yeah.
Is it though?
Because
It's pretty
they're
nichey.
well, yeah, because I mean,
It's
they're
broad for you because you have such an encyclopedic knowledge of our.
well, I have so many like out of my entire music collection, the horror punk lyrics like is the most nostalgic stuff to me, like stuff that I've sung with my friends. Um, man, I'd have to give you a top five, but I get one that comes right off the top of my head. Starlight Decay by Blitzkid, just because I remember being in the pit. Yeah, when I remember when I was dating Heather Golightly, like eons ago. Like I just remember singing that, us singing that to each other in the middle of the pit at the Poison Room.
That's awesome. That's a good memory. Kyle.
You totally stole my Starlight Decay answer. Terror in the Haunted House.
That's a
Love
good
that
one.
song. Love those lyrics. I love a song that tells a cool, creepy story always. Takes you on that ride. I mean, yeah.
Dan.
Hmm. Uh, you know, I have two. I don't know what, and they're very. I'd either go with School's Night Out. I don't know. The lyrics to that since I was a kid always just stuck in my head. I hear it constantly, and I feel even weird saying it, but AFI got called in sick today.
Oh
was a big
yeah.
That's a
was a big
great
song for
song.
me. Yeah.
Good one.
AFI, another band that is oft argued as to how horror punk they truly are, but I 100% give them entree into any of our festivities.
Yeah.
They definitely
Absolutely.
deserve to be there.
There's a cutoff limit though.
Oh yeah, well with a lot of
Sure.
bands for sure, and we that's another topic that we didn't even get into. But I'm not a purist. I'm horror punk to me is from Elvis has moments of horror punk. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's a lot of stuff and it's not a specific thing. Although I do know what we're talking about when we get real specific,
Yeah.
but like I'm into so much shock rock and stuff that's not from Wasp and Alice Cooper and the Cramps and Alien Sex Fiend and just there's all kinds of stuff that I think doesn't match the uniform. So that's a conversation we're gonna have to have in the future is how purist do we get on all of that. But for me, if I got a horror lyric, I would get the suck and fuck lyrics from Bullet tattooed on me. That was the first lyrics to a song that I heard that I was like, what did he just say? It was like, this is way more hardcore than whatever else was happening at the time.
God, if I
Uh,
started getting Misfits lyrics on me, my entire body would be covered.
yeah, that's a hard. Well, and then the other thing is, how do we check and make sure that we have the right Misfits lyrics? Because
The other
what's
thing.
printed in that box is what everybody goes by, but
Yeah.
GD says no, nah, that is not the truth. I think sometimes he's not even saying words, honestly. I was in a band where I would just go on stage and sing, and I very often was just like, hey, someone should book right here. What's in a row? You know what I
It's
mean?
funny. But then that is like, they put out all these records, and then later you hear all these outtakes and all these recordings that they never put out, and they're so much better than what
Yeah.
got released. And the lyrics are far more intelligible too.
Yeah. It's
Like,
so
oh,
weird as to what made it out and why. Yeah.
Everyone's heads just were spinning when he released those 2 lyric books and they started reading the Misfits lyrics. He says, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So moving on from the tattoo, do you have a favorite horror themed food or drink? Chat GPT wants to know.
Hmm.
Kyle.
I always see those like really dark chicken wings, like the goth vampire chicken wings that
Yeah.
are charred and they inject with like blood. I want to try those. So that's probably the one I want to try the most.
That's pretty awesome.
Facebook being what it is.
Dan.
Well, I drink a lot of Monster Energy drink, if that counts, but also some Mexican restaurants around here, they have this Vampiro tequila drink. It looks like they dropped blood in it. It's all sitting at the bottom. It's a nice little drink there, and it's pretty goth.
Awesome. JG.
I got a sweet tooth, and my better half is a professional, like trained cook, and specifically pastries. So, like anything that's Halloween pastry and candy related, I'm like such a whore for 80s Halloween candy. So, like old fashioned style Halloween candy.
I will say that I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but I do every time I eat chicken, I think of Poltergeist. So I'll say fried chicken. Well, that's horror related. Rob
Makes me think
Zombie
of the
made
movie.
fried chicken
Yeah.
horror related, didn't he?
Have you heard of
The fried chicken.
Have you heard of the movie Poultrygeist?
Oh yeah, well there
Yeah.
you go. That's
There
that's
it is.
actually the trauma connection for the Jackalopes is a hipper thing than Rob Zombie, right?
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and then we're done, gang. Uh, again, from our standing in for our listening audience, Chat GPT, the illest MC in my phone. Last question: what's one thing from the horror genre that absolutely terrifies you? So one horror trope that's actually scary to you. Kyle.
I'm sorry, my phone rang. Go ahead.
Oh, that's a
Skip
good
around.
Dan.
Actually scary to me. Besides all the bands that sound like Michael Graves era Misfits, that's really scary that it became a whole genre unto itself.
Yeah.
It's truly frightening.
Yeah, that's a thing. I'm truly frightened by the Misfits fan groups on Facebook that are so full of, you guys just have to admit it that Michael Graves is just as important to the Misfits legacy as Glenn Danzig, which is
They
essentially
never-
like saying Jimmy Swaggart is just as essential to Christianity as God.
I in all the situations, I legitimately am the only one that know this guy before all of this. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Punk rock.
Personally.
Michael Evangelista sang in my friend's like post high school like shoegaze grunge band, and he had no idea about punk rock. He was wearing sweaters and singing. So like, he auditioned for us, and then we sent him to Jerry. But he didn't know anything about that shit whatsoever.
So hilarious. It was obvious. The first time that I played with that guy, I don't want to turn it into a Graves trash
No,
session, because
no,
I
no,
will
but-
say when some of those songs come on, I turn them up just like I turn up Warrant songs and Winger songs. So there are some things that are really silly that the Rev will rock out to. So those songs have a value.
Yeah.
However, when I first met the guy, I thought he was some asshole that was like getting in on our backstage food. He was wearing Dockers. He was bald headed, wearing a golf shirt, like tucked in. And I was like, who's this guy getting into our Subway sandwiches, fellas? Let's go kick his ass. And then somebody's like, that's Michael Graves. And I was like, where's his hair? And they're like, it's inside of his hat. And I was like, okay, this is not going to do. And then he made love to all of the Dayton scene women and left town with chlamydia. No, I'm just kidding. That's totally a joke.
You brought it
But
to
it was very obvious that that dude had no idea what a punk rock was at all. Hadn't seen
Yeah.
one, hadn't been near one.
and you know, I'm not faulting any of those records he's on. Like I put on Famous Monsters and I turn that shit up. You know, it's just I just can't imagine a whole genre of music that, you know, a whole niche of a genre of music of just they want to sound like him, and the Misfits starts with him for them. It blows my mind being an old fucker. You know what I mean?
It's super weird. It is super
It
weird.
really is.
And some people say it's like, you know, oh, well, you wouldn't feel that way if you saw a band that was influenced just by Brian era AC/DC rather than Bon Scott era AC/DC. And I kind of get that, but I don't think it's at all the same thing, nor does it have the
No.
same amount of time or legacy attached to it. It's weird. It's real weird. I wish they would have, that's a whole other podcast, but I wish they would have called it something different. Call it the damn Fiend Club, and I would have been there with bells on.
I had those conversations with them.
Yeah, you got, but you know, I've been in the situation before where I started an entirely new band after the Jackalopes, the Wolf Cult, and we couldn't really get any shows. But then I called that same band the Jackalopes, and we were booked again. So I understand the need to call it what gets money.
Mhm.
That's
I
like,
mean, I guess the strangest thing for me is, you know, going to your local Walmart and seeing those Crimson Ghost shirts. You know,
I mean,
that's always
I'm not above spending $7 on a Misfit shirt to cut the sleeves
Right.
off and do yard work in and stuff.
yeah.
The same shirts at Hot Topic for
That-
25.
That's Walmart
I'll buy it for
Misfits
$7.
right there on my battle vest.
nice.
Walmart Misfits next to a legitimate Gigi Allen patch to offset its.
You
At
say a
Five
lot,
Below now, you can get it even cheaper. At
Oh my
Five
goodness.
Below now.
you can say a lot of things about Jerry, but that guy is a like penultimate marketing guy. Like,
He's smart enough to sign deals with people that are smart, and which is like the same thing about Gene Simmons. Like Gene's not a genius. Gene is a very, very savvy business person who has known when to sign the deal and when to not sign the deal and how to get more out of it. And Jerry's 100% got that. I think Jerry would have been a fantastic real estate agent or car salesman or something like
Definitely
that.
car salesman.
Yeah.
He could
100%.
sell his brother's house right under his neck.
Oh, not sure if we're supposed to talk about that one. I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Misfits internal memo has gone out that says do not discuss these particular topics. And I'm not going to list them. I have a bunch of them. We should have an airing of grievances episode where we speak to Glenn and everybody directly, and we say, "Listen, we love you. We care about you. We want the best for you. Here are some things that we think would help you on your way." And then he'll sue us all and hate us forever. So
to quote Sean Clark,
He's the nice one.
he's the nice one. That's the thing. Yeah. He's the
That's
one
the
that,
thing.
oh, how do you think I feel all these years? I'm always the devil. It's those guys. It's not me. I'm a sweetheart, Dan.
Jerry's got the Jesus tattoo, so I'm just saying,
Oh.
you know what happens. These overly religious people, half the time, they're the ones you got to watch out for. They end up being the most evil in the name of,
Agreed.
Jesus. So,
We can agree on that one. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up. We'll talk more about all that stuff in the future. Do you guys, any of you guys, have anything else you want to say or sell or anything like that?
Go buy Electric Frankenstein's albums.
Yes.
Have some.
Good luck in Japan, man. That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm not even bringing a guitar with me.
That's awesome.
Like they still have a whole street of used guitar stores that are like crammed full of stuff, cheap. So I did this the last time I went. Just walked in, picked out a nice Fender jazz bass, paid like $190, came home, flipped it for $575.
Nice.
That's
So
amazing. That's
yeah,
fantastic.
but I can't wait.
Well, have fun. And there's a restaurant there that's doing a bunch of Electric Frankenstein themed meals. You're going to eat
So
some of that, right?
I definitely am. So this girl, she's a big fan. She manages 6 restaurants in Tokyo, and they're all going to have an EF menu starting in September. And
Hell
then
yeah.
she's going to be hyping all the shows through all of the menus and posters and there's a lantern festival coming up, and there's a EF logo lanterns hanging up in these restaurants. It's
That's
insane.
amazing.
But there's a
That's
whole
amazing.
menu of crazy stuff that, blue barbecue and like just black, like Halloween scary looking things where it's like, I don't know if I want to eat that. And it's going to be delicious, but
Mm-hmm.
it's scary.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's
Awesome.
really cool.
Well, you guys, thank you guys so much. You guys are the best guests I could hope for my first inaugural Shock Pod podcast. We got a bunch of these coming. They're going to be going in seasonal rotation. I'm going to try and keep them going every 2 weeks forever. So if anybody does have anything in the future that you want to promote, hit me up in advance and we'll do it tentpole style so it'll come out near your thing. But otherwise, I'm just going to invite you guys back to anything that looks fun and cool. And I love talking to all you guys.
Always down for it.
Thank
So,
you.
Always down. Yeah.
Can I just-
Awesome.
Can
Well,
I just
thank you.
randomly like pop in, like, hey, who's at the door? Knock knock.
That
Hey,
would
I
be
just
awesome.
figured I'd pop in.
Yeah, like a secret surprise guest. Yeah,
Yeah, like
absolutely.
you have a doorbell sound and then they
Ding
pop
dong. Who
Yep.
could that be? It's like a Pee Wee Herman bit.
in. 100%.
I love it. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you to the listeners and viewers out there for supporting Shock Pod and Horror Shock Records and all the bands that we support and are friends with as well. Keep rocking out in the free world or whatever to steal something from somebody else. We'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.